In this video, we're going to examine the Lambda expression from the scenario of the HTML helper. Now, this is the model that we used previously, and in here we have a for each loop where we're looping through a collection or a list of user view models. What we did is we explicitly pointed to the object from the for each loop. So user VM is what we called it. So that's one object from our list of user view model, and we're grabbing each property explicitly one at a time. Now that direct reference can be a problem if our model is actually null. So if there's nothing, if our list comes back as a null reference, then obviously the for each loop will fail, and we'll have to kind of put an if statement around that for protection. But then each one of these user view model lines will also cause an exception to occur. Or if we end up with an empty collection of null objects, again, we can run into the same problem. So how do we combat that? So to do that, we'll use our HTML helper. So we'll do @HTML dot, and then there's a display for function. Now display for, again, uses a Lambda expression. And you'll see here that we have an expression with a function, and then it has a list of user view model. That list becomes the input parameter for our Lambda expression. Now, if you remember those input parameters, we kind of just gave them really quick short names. Typically, you'll find examples of this being called model item. So model item actually references to the model property off of our view. So if we do this dot model, model item is the same thing. It's a reference back to that property. So what we don't want, though, is we don't want the model item, because the model item is a list of all the models in the collection. We want just that single item from our for each loop. We want that user VM. So here we say model item arrow, and then we're actually just going to say user VM dot first name. So we're still using that user VM because it's in the context of the for each loop. So we're ignoring the collection here, and we'll actually talk about this in a later video. And we'll go through what we need to do as it pertains to postbacks and things like that. So model item, basically it's kind of a throwaway variable in this context, and we're using the user VM dot first name. Now we'll go down to last name, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and I'll pull it out. And I'd like to make this a very verbose example of the expression, just to give you a feel of what's really happening with these little short expressions that we're making. So we have HTML.display4, same as above, and then we have this Lambda expression that we kind of just dropped in there. Well, the Lambda expression really is just a function. So what we can do instead of just doing the quick one-liner is I'm actually going to open up my parentheses, and then I'm going to start by declaring the parameter for our function. Now, typically you would say void the name of the function, and then you put a list of parameters. Well, our functions that we're using as our expressions have no they have no name. They have no name, and the return type is kind of implicit to what the function returns. And so to kind of get away from that and letting the compiler figure all that work out, we're just going to start with the parameter list. And in this case, our parameter is a list of user view model. So here I'm going to do my parentheses for my parameter list for my function. And I'm going to say list of user view model, close. And then I'll have to use my accelerator to add the full namespace. And then I'm going to call this model item. So you'll see a little bit of kind of parallels happening here. I'm going to do an arrow, and then I'm going to do curly brackets. So just like a function has a body inside of curly brackets, we're going to do the same thing here. Then we'll say return, and then we're going to return user VM dot last name. So this expression for last name is the exact same expression for first name. The only difference is that the last name scenario is very verbose, where the first name scenario is not as verbose. So if we move down further into the email, we'll go ahead and do the same thing. So I like to just kind of cut and pull that out. So HTML.display4, and we can say, in this case I'll use X instead of model item just to kind of differentiate. But again, it's a throwaway variable in this case, so we'll just say x arrow user VM email. Now you may be wondering, what do we do here in this href component? We can actually do the same thing, html.display4, and there are scenarios where this will actually cause problems, but we're not going to get into display templates at this point. So if we go with what we're seeing in terms of just straight text output, we'll do display4, and I'll just do the same thing again here. And that will actually get rendered out as a string. That string will be concatenated to the mail-to, and then we'll end up with the same email address output. So then the last one here is password. So html.display4x. Alright, so let's go ahead and just consolidate this down. So this will be x arrow user vm.lastname. Because I like to keep my code kind of clean and simple. Alright, so we'll save all of that, and we'll go ahead and run. And there's our output. Now if you remember, we have a filter here on our where, so we're only getting the Larrys. Let's jump back into our controller here. We'll stop, and I'll just comment out this where piece of our controller. F6 to build, F5 to run. And there are all of our users, all presented, and we're utilizing that Lambda expression to help constrict our output. So that is how you utilize Lambda expressions with your HTML